Hey folks, so we're gonna go over a serious topic today, and I wanna be very thoughtful as to how I'm framing this video today because what I'm about to share with you is important, it's profound, and to me, it's deeply, deeply empowering. So when I began this research, my initial reaction was like, oh my God, I must share this with the whole world. But I also want to be mindful as to how I present the information so it's strictly informative and doesn't step on any social media policies, which quite personally are getting really constrictive and restrictive in some cases. So this may require you, the viewers, to read between the lines, and honestly, I apologize for that. So let me take a moment and tee this up for you so you understand where I'm coming from. Because as we all know, the world has been hit with a series of viruses, one in particular that has put the world on hold and that we will all be recovering from for a very, very long time to come in more ways than one. So when two of my family members got the virus this year, one contracted it at home from their partner, and another contracted it while in the hospital for a broken bone. And between the two of them, they were given no treatment options at the hospital, which was profoundly disturbing because it's not like they got it in 2020. They got it in 2022. Now, I find it strange that this policy exists on YouTube here. So the full policy is content that encourages the use of home remedies, prayer, or rituals in place of medical treatment, such as consulting a doctor or going to the hospital. Because quite honestly, as I just shared, despite having gone or gotten it in the hospital, no medical treatment was given. So what else is a person left with besides home remedies, prayer, or rituals? Obviously, that's a rhetorical question. Now, luckily, one of my family members without the JAB actually recovered, but the one with the JAB and the booster didn't recover and passed away. And maybe some of you can actually relate to this. I just think it's really unfortunate. But this made me really think of a person named Dr. Wooster Beach. And he was born in the 18th century and lived throughout the 19th century and was an advocate for the American eclecticism movement in medicine. And he had truly an open mind to finding remedies from all cultures, whether it be Native American, Asian, European, or otherwise. And he would encourage the students that followed his work to seriously investigate the remedies of all schools of medicine and choose remedies that were most valuable to administer individually because everybody's body is, of course, different and will react differently to a treatment. This makes perfect sense to me. And I'll leave it up to you as to whether this actually makes sense to you. I've said this before on the channel, but knowing that 80% of the world still relies on phytopharmaceuticals and herbal remedies, I personally became interested in researching what alternative herbal remedies and medicines are available and administered in other countries around the world, specifically for viruses, and namely the latest one, because no one is Dr. Wooster Beach style investigating and reporting on that here, at least to my knowledge. Now, mostly I was interested in the Asian continent, where you have this like rich 2,000 to 4,000 plus year old history of herbal pharmacopeia and practice, which is still in practice today for good reason. And it's also the major mode of medical dissemination and care. Now, if you don't believe me, you could go to Asian news sources. You can consult with the medical literature coming out of those countries, which we'll do quite a bit today. And you can also talk to people who live and practice there. Now, I do want to emphasize that this knowledge has been passed down in writing and in practice for thousands of years. And within the last number of decades has really been put to more like rigorous, peer-reviewed scientific tests that honestly Western practitioners can consider without writing off completely as like folkish, which does happen from time to time, which may be warranted in some cases, but you can't really make broad stroke assumptions either way. Now, the folks who watch this channel likely won't fall into that camp because I know we have quite a number of folks who use herbal remedies on a regular basis, whether it be strictly for medicinal purposes or culinary purposes or both, because after all, let food be thy medicine. And many of us know that nutrition and our environment is the foundation of health. It's the foundation of repair and regeneration for the whole system. So taking preventative and proactive measures to be healthy, to eat healthy, and architect a healthy environment and community around us is vital for our health and well-being. Now, I don't think I'm actually saying anything too profound here. So in the spirit of Dr. Wooster Beach, I think it's wise for us to keep an open mind to different ways of approaching health, particularly when it comes to our disease care system. Because that system really comes up with so few solutions for prevention, treatment, and cure, especially at an individual level, since everybody's body is different. Now, I'm personally attracted to the concept of prevention and helping tonify, strengthen, and improve your overall system every day so that when you are hit with an ailment, your body is more likely to recover. And I'm also interested in having a range of options on the market because medicines and treatments are not a one-size-fits-all solution, especially because everybody's body and needs are different. Very little information was shared in the way of what other non-Western countries were doing for prevention, treatment, and cures when the latest virus and its derivatives were making their way around the world. And I personally found that to be very peculiar and very short-sighted, especially because when you have a problem, you turn to others to learn. Like if you're going to put out a scientific report on a subject, one of the first things that you do is you do a comprehensive search or like a meta-analysis as to what else is out there on that particular subject and what methods were used to come up with conclusions on that topic. That's also what we do on a platform like this every day. I mean, if you want to learn how to unclog your toilet or, do some agroforestry or something, you watch some videos and you see what a number of people were doing and how they've learned from that thing and what their successes and failures were. Or we may ask our neighbor how to do something because he or she has done it a zillion times before. This is how we learn. So personally, I would have loved to see more information sharing on prevention, treatment, and cures, especially because when we look at confirmed cases and deaths relative to the population in countries like China and India and Japan, they were much, much lower than say the UK and the United States. So that got me curious, what are they doing differently? Of course, they may have better overall health, maybe less obesity, maybe less metabolic disorders and conditions like that. But what would I be able to get there off the shelf or via prescription that I cannot get here. Now, if you're as curious as I was, then stick around for this episode because we're about to go for a deep dive on herbal remedies and treatments for viruses, and specifically the virus that began spreading 3 years back, which I'll call David for short. Not to be confused with the biblical name of David. It has a nice ring to it though, David. I will say right now that if you think this information is helpful to you or your loved ones, please consider liking and sharing it. And if you care to, feel free to subscribe and hit the notifications button also on this channel. But honestly, I wish I knew what I know now back before when some of my family members were sick. But none of us can turn back time. And the only thing we can do is just empower ourselves with information that we find useful and that makes sense to us. So strap in because we'll be going through a number of concepts and other stuff that may be very new to you. So, I'll do my best to explain them. And I will disclose up front that I am not a medical professional, nor do I pretend to be. And this stuff that I'm sharing with you, it does not in any way constitute or substitute for professional medical advice. I am merely sharing personal stories and peer-reviewed literature that hopefully encourages you to consider new possibilities so that we could be more Dr. Wooster Beach-ish. Because most of what I'm pulling from is news reports from places like China, India, and Hong Kong, and also peer-reviewed science journals. Now, I will say that I will be sharing a variety of ingredients and combinations with you as per what is discussed with some of the medical literature that I'm reading. And I would, on that note, recommend not to self-prescribe or self-treat and actually consult a professional practitioner who can guide you and who could help access quality ingredients. Because when it comes to Eastern medicine, it's very rare that you'll find usage of single herbs like you do in Western medicine or Western herbal practices. Most of those herbs are used in combinations and are really sophisticated formulas. And some of those formulas are patented, and many of those formulas are done slightly differently for each individual because, like a broken record here, everybody's body is different. Now, I want to look into peer-reviewed studies and analyses on potential herbal remedies for viruses, and again, mainly for David. And one way to understand potential treatments is by something called molecular docking analysis. Now, if you break those three words down, you'll probably guess what it means. Basically, it's trying to predict the interaction between a molecule from a drug and a target protein from a disease agent like a bacteria or virus. So can this drug that docks onto this microbe prevent entry into a cell or inhibit replication or just completely disable it? So it's like trying to figure out who fits into Cinderella's shoes. All right, so I'm gonna turn to my computer here now because I have a number of these peer-reviewed science journals here, and some of them may be some new terms for you and complicated terms, so I wanna share my screen with you so that you could follow along more easily. And I basically wanna do each of these scientific journals and studies justice by just basically summarizing them to you. But I'll be providing all of these science journals to you in the description so that if you want to do research or if you want to actually read them further, you could do that yourself. So the spike or S protein of David is important for the attachment and pathogenesis of the virus. Therefore, this study that's called in silico molecular docking analysis targeting David, spike protein, and selected herbal constituents, which was published in the Journal of Pure and Applied Microbiology in 2020. So this one is focused on the search of useful ligands for S protein among active constituents present in common herbs that could serve as efficient remedies for David. So they tested only 12 compounds present in common herbs. Now, these compounds weren't just plucked from the air. They picked these 12 compounds because they are well known in enhancing or protecting the immune system, particularly from viral agents. And you often heard folks suffering from this thing called a cytokine storm syndrome, which is when your immune system responds too aggressively to symptoms. Now, this often happens in folks with like autoimmune diseases. So there's quite a bit of research on compounds that can alleviate that. And many of our anti-inflammatory herbs may be used to help actually suppress those symptoms. So there's one here called, this is a fun word, Epigallocatechin gallate. That had the highest binding affinity with the viral S protein. This is found in Camellia sinensis. Most folks will know that as green tea, which is kind of crazy, right? The one that had the second highest binding affinity with the viral S protein was curcumin. And most of us will know this from curcuma longa or turmeric. So this study shows that Epigallocatechin gallate found in green tea has, quote, the highest potentiality for acting as an inhibitor of David, and it binds to the S protein at 8 amino acid residues. The binding sites are situated near to the amino acids, which are required for pathogenicity. This result needs in vivo studies, and basically in vivo means in the body studies. So a lot of these studies are done in vitro, which means in the lab. And oftentimes you'll have an in vivo study that starts like maybe in mice, and then they may consider actually doing it in like a double-blind study with humans. Now, this study was done in 2020, or at least it was published in 2020. So it might have been actually done in like late 2019 or early 2020. Now, there were other compounds that had different levels of efficaciousness when it came to binding to the S protein, but for brevity's sake, I'll only highlight the top 2 most efficacious according to this study. And you can read this study yourself in case you're curious to see the other ones that were pretty moderate to successful in binding to this S protein. So after reading this study, I wanted to see if there were further studies that were like 1, corroborating this by repeating experiments, and then 2, looking into in vivo studies as this one had suggested. And I will say that there is a boatload of studies out there, like dozens and dozens of studies that you could tap into, and I'll highlight a handful of them here. So there's another by Menengazi et al. And Hens et al. And this one's an interesting one. The green tea catechin epigallocatechin gallate inhibits the David infection. And this one says epigallocatechin 3 gallate, or EGCG, the major component of green tea, has several beneficial properties, including antiviral activities. Therefore, we examined whether EGCG has antiviral activities against David. And EGCG blocked not only the entry of David, but also for MERS and the regular SARS-CoV, pseudotyped lentiviral vectors, and inhibited virus infections in vitro. So that's another in vitro study. Then there's this other one called Epigallocatechin gallate from green tea effectively blocks infection of David and new variants by inhibiting spike binding in the ACE2 receptor. So this one, it's in Cell and Bioscience 2021. And it said, we demonstrated that green tea beverage or its major ingredient, Epigallocatechin gallate, were highly effective in inhibiting infection of live David and human coronavirus. In addition, infection of the pseudoviruses with spikes of the new variants, so that's B1, B1.3, and B1.4, was efficiently blocked by GTB or EGCG. GTB is green tea beverage, and EGCG is epigallocatechin gallate, which again is essentially the stuff found in green tea. So the conclusion of this report is that these data support further clinical evaluation and development of EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate or green tea, as a novel, safe, and cost-effective natural product for prevention and treatment of David transmission and infection. I mean, this to me is freaking mind-blowing. Here's another one. Epigallocatechin gallate, a green tea polyphenol, reduces coronavirus replication in a mouse model. This is in viruses, and it's a special issue called Vaccines and Therapeutics Against Coronaviruses, and it was published in 2021. So these are all fairly recent. So this is the first mouse model. So that means it's done in vivo. It's not an in vitro study, which means that it's in the lab. This is in vivo now. This report is the first to show that green tea polyphenols are effective in inhibiting coronavirus replication in vivo. Further animal experiments will be required to examine the effect of green tea on David replication. So this one is showing that is effective. All right, so another mouse model study with green tea being part of the mix that was studied is this one from Shin et al. And it's the potential of Ben-815 as an anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and antioxidant natural agent that can be used to prevent and improve inflammation-related diseases of David. It was published in Phytomedicine Plus, I will say, in 2021. And the Ben-815 basically contains extracts from guava leaves, which are Psidium guajava, green tea leaves, which I mentioned, Camellia sinensis, and then rose petals, which is Rosa hybrida. They had previously shown to have a therapeutic effect on allergic rhinitis, so they said, okay, well, let's try this off-the-shelf drug using these 3 herbal phytopharmaceuticals and test it on David. And the conclusion was it is an anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and antioxidant natural agent that can be used to prevent and improve inflammation-related diseases and David. Like, this is crazy. These are not my words. These are words coming straight out of this peer-reviewed literature. And as you can see, I've just highlighted maybe like a half a dozen of these reports, and there's so many more out there. So this one is also a fascinating study on the gut-lung connection and how the disease negatively affects the gut flora and how that can have an overall detrimental effect on the body. But the polyphenols in the tea are actually therapeutic in nature. And that one is by Zhu et al. So that's another one that I will just mention that is super interesting, because I think like within the last 10 years or so, we have much more information on that gut connection with like our body and our health and depression and all that other kind of stuff. All right, so let's move on. There's so many studies here. I mean, folks, if this is the first time you're hearing such like repeated, peer-reviewed, researched literature, like let me know, and please give this a thumbs up. I mean, obviously more information is needed and more in vivo double-blind studies are needed, but I would say that this is like super promising and should be explored further. But where is the money when it comes to something as ubiquitous as green tea? That's what I would venture to say why you see no peer-reviewed literature like this coming out of the United States. We don't have a green tea lobby. But if we did, we'd probably see more of these studies being investigated. All right, so moving on to the next major paper that I found to be interesting, and this is from 2021, and it's called Traditional Herbal Folk Medicine Used for Controlling David Disease, published in, like I said, 2021 in the International Journal of Innovation, Scientific Research and Review. And this is more like a meta-analysis or review of all the current literature out there. I find these papers actually really helpful because they basically give you a bird's eye view. And I was interested in the tables they had in this paper outlining the potential efficacious antiviral compounds and whether they were done in vitro or in vivo. So with this meta-analysis, they had Glycyrrhiza glabra, and it's called like mulethi or licorice, yashti madu, I'm probably saying these a little wrong. And they looked at the root of this, and it's obviously antiviral, remedy for sore throat, cold, cough, and acts as an immunity booster. And it inhibited David activity under in vitro and animal studies. So that's just licorice. Like we've been using licorice for millennia to fight sickness. Artemisia annua, you probably would know Artemisia as like the wormwoods, and they're looking into the aerial parts of these, and that was considered antioxidant, antimalarial, and antiviral activity, and it was a David inhibitor under in vitro and animal studies both. The next one on the list is Tinospora cordifolia, or Gaducci or Galoy. Now they looked at the whole plant for this, and it's considered antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, antiviral properties, and it helps in tackling respiratory problems like cough, cold, and breathing. And it was also a David inhibitor under in vitro and animal studies. Next one on the list is good old aloe vera. And they are looking at the juice of aloe vera, and that is a David inhibitor under in vitro and animal studies as well. And then here's a mixture of 3 plants, which I have, and I'll be able to show you a number of these. This is Indian gooseberry, Emblica officinalis, baheda, which is Terminalia bellerica, and black myrobalan, which is Terminalia chibula. And these are the aerial parts, and they looked at rejuvenation, antiviral activity, throat infections, immunity booster, and it is also a David inhibitor under in vitro and animal studies. The last one sounds scary. It's called deadly carrots, Thaspia garganica, and this is the fruits and the roots. And they were looking at this thapsigargan, which is a sesquiterpene lactone secondary metabolite. So it's one of the compounds in this particular plant. And it has antiviral activities, and it is a David inhibitor under in vitro and animal studies. Now, these are just a small selection of plants. This paper has a list of 45 herbs that are being used, but many of these herbs have not been fully tested for this purpose. So the paper, as I would conclude, is that there just needs to be further research in the area. And I decided to actually highlight some of the key herbs in here that have both in vitro and animal studies backing them. So, and again, a lot of these herbs are ones that you could easily access. I mean, I have most of these in my materia medica here, in my herbal repertoire. It's kind of crazy. Why is this information not out there? I have no clue. Okay. Next on my list is a peer-reviewed paper that just came out relatively recently. It's in March of 2020 by Shivada et al. And this is called Herbal Remedies, Nutraceuticals, and Dietary Supplements for David Management, an Update. And this was published in the Clinical Complementary Medicine and Pharmacology. And this says, our review indicates that numerous herbal remedies, dietary supplements, and nutraceutical products have higher safety tolerances than standard pharmaceutical drugs and gives certain amounts of proof to begin a clinical conversation regarding their possible use in the treatment of David. These herbal medications cannot prevent the virus, but may enhance the patient's well-being, which is sometimes what we need. We need to boost our immune system. We need to immunomodulate our bodies in order to be able to fight off ailments and diseases. So this one highlights 11 phytochemicals that are effective against David, and this is like in a table that they have. The first one, and something that we've actually highlighted on this channel before, is ashwagandha, and that's Withania somnifera. And I'm not going to go into depth into all these because there's so much to cover. I still have so much to cover, but I just want to give you these herbs out there. Bicalin, which is Scutellaria bicalensis. It's so funny because I have this and I didn't get a chance to put this in a glass jar in my apothecary. And it's so funny because I heard some munching at night, and I went and I found that a white-tailed or a white-footed mouse was eating my Scutellaria bicalensis. So typically that's an herb that's often used for like, like headaches and things like that, or fevers. So I just thought that was really funny that he was eating it, because I was like, oh, maybe he has like a little ailment that he's trying to eat that for. So anyway, that's just a little side subject. So like the ashwagandha, bicalin, china root, which is called Wolfiporia extensa, ginger, zingiber officinale, Giloy again, I mentioned this, Tinospora cordifolia, tulsi or holy basil. I mean, I love that as a tea. It has this nice spice to it. Ocimum tenuiflorum, and Japanese honeysuckle. I mean, that's the stuff that we're actually like removing from this land here. I mean, that, and I'll return to Japanese honeysuckle because it's an important foundation in traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, for this particular virus. So that's Lonicera japonica. Licorice, of course, I've mentioned that before, Glycyrrhiza glabra, and that's often used in multiple remedies. Like they'll put it into a larger herbal remedy, and it gives it a nice like syrupy texture. Not everybody loves the taste of licorice, but I find it to be very palatable, and I particularly like it, and I use it in a lot of my herbal remedies. Okay, the next one is Mongolian milk vetch, and that's astragalus. And I actually use astragalus and I decoct it in my soups and my stews. So I used kind of 6 astragalus roots, and it's also considered an adaptogen. So I think that's an important one and something that we'll definitely cover on this channel in the future. Turmeric, I take that every day, curcuma longa. It's something that my parents take as well. And Visakha, which is not one that I'm personally familiar with, but it's called Adatoda vasica or Justicia adatad. I'm not familiar with that one, but maybe some of you are, or some of you want to get familiar with this. So this particular paper, Herbal Remedies, Nutraceuticals, and Dietary Supplements for the David management and update, these are some of the herbs that they are looking at. And as you could see, you're already starting to see some repeats here. And it's good because when you have all these different studies and all these meta-analyses coming out, it's good to pressure test, and it's not just coming from one place, or it's not like, coming from one source. You're actually seeing it multiple times, and then you could start to triangulate and realize, oh, like, okay, these are probably really useful and successful in the treatment and management of these viruses. Now, regarding this one, the Herbal Remedies, Nutraceuticals, and Dietary Supplements for David management, an update, the same one. It says, regarding David infection, herbal medicines with immunomodulatory effects. Now, immunomodulatory basically means that it modulates the immune system. So sometimes, in that cytokine storm, your immune system will overreact. Well, an immunomodulatory herb or compound or medicine will help bring that immune system down, will just kind of calm the immune system. Or if your immune system is underperforming, then it will boost that immune system. So that's where that immunomodulatory herbs really actually comes in handy. So if you could find immunomodulatory herbs that are also antivirals, then I would say, hey, those are the ones that you actually want to do studies on as it relates to this particular virus. So regarding this infection, herbal medicines with immunomodulatory effects may offer patients a promising preventative treatment option. Several Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicines, so that's also known as TCM, are effective during this worrisome pandemic. Some examples would be ones that we've already mentioned: Tinospora cordifolia, Withania somnifera, which is the ashwagandha, Scutellaria bicalensis, which is basically this Chinese skullcap, and Curcuma longa, which is the turmeric. It also said that traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, was shown to be utilized with over 90% efficacy when the David pandemic broke out in early 2020. So I'm going to repeat that again. Traditional Chinese medicine was shown to be utilized with over 90% efficacy when the David pandemic broke out in early 2020. These are just reviews and statements coming from these papers, these peer-reviewed science journals, okay? That is a strong statement, especially if the death rates in countries are accurate, because if they are accurate, this will show that, perhaps this statement is actually true. Okay, continuing on with this paper, because this was a beast of a paper. They looked at 10,000 molecules, including natural ingredients, and they were tested for antiviral activity. So that's 10,000 molecules that they're just basically siphoning through in this library, testing them for antiviral activity and against David using a cell-based assay in Vero E6 cells using immunofluorescence, Western blot, and flow cytometry analytical techniques. Now, I don't know what most of that means, but it just basically says they're looking at 10,000 molecules against this particular virus, and they're using many different ways to actually explore what is effective. So it says preliminary screening of phytoconstituents for bioactivity is an ideal exploratory tactic for obtaining their biological compounds in the end. And I would agree with that. Like, you screen what's already out there and you see actually what works. It's very similar to the molecular docking techniques. It's like, let's screen all these things. They only looked at 12 compounds, but this one's looking at 10,000 molecules, and they're just kind of like fitting what actually fits together. What's the Cinderella who fits into the shoe, here. Now this, it gets a little interesting because during the David pandemic, the Minister of AYUSH, which is the Ayurvedic, Yoga, Naturopathy, Unani, Siddha, and Homeopathy, that's what it stands for, AYUSH. So this is basically the Minister of medical stuff in India, suggested drinking kadha. Now, kadha is nothing but an extract prepared from various herbal drugs, and its benefits are actually proven that it induces immunity in individuals. So this is coming straight out of India. So I'll share this and I'll probably just do a video just on this, but to make kadha and an effective home remedy, and again, this is coming straight out of India and its minister, you need 2 cups of water, 1 inch of peeled ginger, 4 to 5 cloves, 5 to 6 black pepper, and 5 to 6 fresh tulsi basil leaves, 1/2 teaspoon of honey, 2-inch cinnamon stick, and licorice if available. I mean, that already sounds like a delicious drink, especially during the winter months here. Like, are you kidding me? That sounds absolutely delicious. So sometimes they'll actually put this in water. Sometimes they'll put it in like a milk or a coconut milk. But basically, you put that in a saucepan and you begin boiling. In the meantime, you crush the ginger, you crush the cloves and the black pepper and cinnamon with a mortar and pestle. And then once that water or the coconut milk or the milk is boiled, then you use all those crushed ingredients along with the basil leaves and you add that to the saucepan. And then you cook that over medium heat for about 20 minutes until it decocks and is reduced to half. And then you strain that in a glass, you add honey, and then you drink. So that is basically what is being shared in India to do in order to boost kind of your immune or have like this immunomodulatory effect. I will also say that they mentioned cloves in here, which is not something that we had heard about before, But I will say, from a side note, cloves have a really high ORAC score, which basically means that they take free radicals, which free radicals are the things in our bodies that actually could cause disease and cancer and things along those lines. So if you have plants or nutritive items that you're eating that have free radical scavenging potential, cloves is actually one of the highest. To my knowledge. I'm sure there's probably something higher out there, but as far as like kind of herbs go, cloves are kind of top shelf. So it was nice to see that that was actually mentioned here. Okay, so it also continues to say various Indian herbal drugs like Withania somnifera, curcuma longa, Ocimum sanctum, and Philanthus emblica are found to be effective in David-related complications. So Withania somnifera again is like the ashwagandha, curcuma longa is the turmeric, Ocimum sanctum is the holy basil, and Philanthus emblica I think is what's referred to as the Indian gooseberry. It continues forward and it says the natural antiviral components like bicolin, bilirubin, corosolic acid, glycyrrhizin, hesperidin, mulbaricide A, rutin, psychosapinin A, and verbascicide were found to be effective in the treatment of David infection evaluated by molecular docking. So this report is basically saying these specific compounds that are found in many of these herbs, just like Epigallocatechin gallate, which was found in green tea, these are specific compounds in these herbs that were looked at and evaluated by molecular docking in the same way that the green tea one was evaluated. And these are really effective. So when I see glycyrrhizin, I know that comes from Glycyrrhiza glabra, which is licorice. When I look at mulbaricide, I'm thinking that's probably in some type of mulberry, in some type of like mulberry tree. Bicolin, that's going to be in that Chinese skullcap, bicolin. So a lot of times they'll find these unique compounds out of these herbs. They'll do a study where they're just finding these compounds in these herbs and they're saying, and then they name them after that, basically that herb, that scientific name. So, this to me is just freaking mind blowing. I mean, this is like opening up a whole other world of potential treatments and, ways to become healthy. It's insane. I mean, I need to take a breath here. It's kind of crazy. All right, let's see what's up next. Now, the next report is the following, and it's by Al-Garawi. I'm probably mispronouncing it at all, 2020. So this is an earlier one, but it's called Inhibition of Viral Infection by Using the Natural Herbal Remedies as Alternative Treatment. All right, and that's in the Systematic Reviews in Pharmacy, and it was published again in 2020. And it highlights the following herbs: Crete or green chiretta, that's Andrographis paniculata; garlic; Allium sativum, licorice again, Glycyrrhiza glabra. This one is called Volcamaria inermis or Clerodendrum inerma. It seems to inactivate the virus, that particular one. Very interesting. It's the first time I'm hearing that here. Henbane, which is Hyoscyamus niger, probably mispronouncing some of these scientific names, but I want to give you the scientific names. I think it's really important because oftentimes the common name is the common name for many different types of herbs, and some of these are actually more known in Eastern medicine and not in Western medicine. Okay, fish mint, Hutania cordata, which is funny because I actually have this. It's like they sell it as an ornamental plant. I actually have some growing here, which is bizarre. I'll have to do more research into that. Woad, Asadus indicotica, which is one that I actually have here and I will be highlighting again. And then Chinese rhubarb, which is Rheum palmatum. That's also another one that I see in traditional Chinese medicine quite a lot. All right, continuing on with the same paper, Inhibition of Viral Infection by Using by using of natural herbal remedies as alternative treatments. This one actually highlights the traditional Chinese medicine TCM treatments for David patients. And this is Trichosanthes kirillowii, which is in the cucumber family. I actually think we actually mentioned this not as a medicinal on this channel, but as something that you could actually make crafts out of. So there you go, you find another multi-use for this. Ephedra sinica, which is, ephedra I do believe is an adaptogen, and I will probably be covering this. I've used ephedra in the past, but very small amounts. Glycyrrhiza glabra again, like licorice. I mean, licorice is going to the top of my list here. For some of you who don't have a taste for licorice, you might want to start getting a taste for licorice. Okay, Werfbania villosa or Amomum villosa, which is called Amomum, Prunus amygdalis or Prunus dulcis, which is bitter almond, and then Phragmites communis, which is Phragmites, and gypsum. Gypsum is the one thing that's not an herb, and you might be like, hey, that's a little weird. I'll cover gypsum, basically in this video, but a little further down. Okay, another concoction consisted of it's called Lianhua Qingwen, and this is something that I'm going to highlight more of because it seemed very important when I started to look at Chinese reports on Chinese news sources, and when I was looking at peer-reviewed science journals that are coming out of China. This one, Lianhua Qingwen, really came up quite a lot. And this concoction, generally the foundation consists of Scutellaria bicalensis, which I had mentioned, the bicolin, the Lonicera japonica again, which is the Japanese honeysuckle, which I mentioned, and Forsythia. And so that is the foundation, and usually Lianhua Qingwen is a medicine that has those 3 herbs in it, in addition to other herbs. So when you go to a traditional Chinese medical practitioner or an integrative medical practitioner who's been trained in traditional Chinese medicine, he or she may look at you as an individual and say, okay, well, these are the things that you're exhibiting. If you're exhibiting a high fever, then they might give you an herb in there that will reduce your fever. And so they will basically take this foundation of Lianhua Qingwen and add multiple herbs to you, which is why I don't want to say that this is not something that I am prescribing these things for you. These are things that are often usually individually tailored to you and your constitution. This one goes on to say another concoction is called QPD, which is a concoction of 20 herbs. So again, going back to the fact that traditional Chinese medicine is never usually one herb, it's always multiple herbs. So this has 20 herbs in the one concoction as a medicine, and it is heavily promoted in the diagnosis and treatment of David. And this is quote from this paper: the effective rate to cure David is more than 90%, according to this review. I mean, this can be totally bogus, but look, I'm looking at multiple peer-reviewed journals across multiple people who, are not sponsored by any kind of pharmaceutical industry or anything like that. If you read a science journal, it will often say that the authors have no affiliation that could influence their results, and that often happens. And there's of course loopholes for that, but like I said, we don't have a green tea or a licorice lobby here. So you're not going to get any sponsorship for this coming out of Western medicine, but the fact that this is coming out of peer-reviewed journals in many well-esteemed peer-reviewed journals coming out of other countries, you have to kind of pay attention. Again, going back Dr. Wooster Beach style and saying holy crap, let's look what other people are doing out there. If I were in China, if I were in India, what can I get over the counter? What can I get if I went to see an integrative practitioner over there that I cannot get here, right? So I'm just trying to break this down to you for you and maybe blow your mind as my mind has been blown. All right, continuing forward. Okay, so this is in the same, analysis here. And they are now looking at recommended AYUSH plants, and many of these are actually part of the kadha drink, which I had just previously mentioned. So the first one is ashwagandha, again, with Withania somnifera. Again, it's something that we've highlighted on this channel just recently. Cloves, Syzygium aromaticum. I mean, this is something that you do like when you're actually making like eggnog or your fancy drinks during the holidays. Maybe put in a few extra cloves this time. Ginger, Zingiber officinale. Giloy, Tinospora cordifolia. I mentioned this before, and it may seem like I'm on repeat, but it's because it's actually a different paper. Tulsi, holy basil, Ocimum tenuifolium, Japanese honeysuckle again, Lonicera japonica, licorice, Glycyrrhiza glabra, turmeric, curcuma longa, pepper, Piper nigrum. Often the turmeric and the pepper go together because the pepper actually catalyzes the turmeric and makes it work better in the body. So oftentimes when you see an herbal remedy that involves turmeric, it usually always goes hands in hand with black pepper. Now, some people are allergic to pepper. There's a very few sort of people that are actually allergic to fresh black pepper, so that would be something that I would obviously consider. And again, you have to tailor it to your own body and your own conditions. And then the last one is cardamom, which, you know, I use in cooking, and I know a lot of Indian people will use in their cooking as well. So, unbelievable. I mean, tell me if this is not blowing your mind already, and if you've stuck with me for all this long. I'm almost done. I'm almost done, I promise. It's just that there's so much out there, and I want to share it with all of you. And I know it can be overwhelming, but you could always, like, you know, go back and take one herb at a time and and rewatch this like a million times. Okay, so when I was reviewing Chinese news reports and articles, there has been an emphasis on this over-the-counter medication, like I had mentioned, called Lianhua Qingwen. Which is a capsule, but the name Lianhua is shortened for two herbs. So there are like 13 herbs in the concoction. There's like, you know, maybe more or less herbs depending on like what your situation is. But Lianhua is basically the combination of two herbs in it. And then Qingwen means alleviate pandemic. And this is often suggested for patients with fever, and they're the ones that are encouraged to actually take Lianhua Qingwen. And you could just get this over the counter in China. So Lianhua combines the forsythia fruit, and that's used for fever and anything related to heat. And then Lonicera japonica, which I had mentioned before, and that is the flowers of honeysuckle. And that's often paired with the forsythia and used for heat reduction. So those you often see together. The next one is ephedra sinica, and that is honey fried ephedra. Indigo woad root, which I had mentioned previously, which is Isatis indigotica, and that's effective in sore throat. Fish mint, which is the Hutayunia cordata, and that's clearing phlegm out. That's very useful for that. And then the root of holly fern, which is Critomonium fortunii, which is clearing fever or heat-related rashes. And then we have Dryopteris crassorhizoma, which is the rhizome that they're using, and that's the thick-stemmed wood fern. The Pogostemon cablin, which is the patchouli aerial parts, so not just like hippie patchouli that you like burn in your house in a candle. Rhodiola crenulata, which is the rhodiola root or the rhizome. And rhodiola, I have that in tincture form. I use that actually here, and I think it's also very good for your heart. Prunus armeniaca, which is the apricot. Glycyrrhiza glabra again, which is the licorice. Mentha, which is mint. There's all different types of mints there. And then gypsum, and you might say, okay, well, gypsum again, this is what I mentioned, it's not an herb. I found it interesting that it's used in traditional Chinese medicine, and that's often used in treating very high fever. And then rheum palmatum, which is the Chinese rhubarb. So that's some of the basic foundation of Lianhua Qingwen, which is just basically a capsule that people could get, off the shelf in China during the pandemic. It's kind of amazing that this was available in another country, and this kind of stuff is not made available more easily for people in a country like this. And yet you have all of these different articles and research reports coming out about its efficaciousness, especially with somebody who has like a high fever. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is just, to me, this is like blowing my mind. And it goes back to what I wanted to share with you in the beginning, which is I think this is like super empowering. And you might see why I wanted to actually share this with all of you. It's crazy. So, I mean, this goes on to say that the Lianhua components, ephedra, apricot, the plaster or gypsum, and licorice originated from the Ma Jingxi Gan decoction. So that's a certain decoction. And additionally, they had 4 other herbs in the prescription, and then that was namely forsythia, licorice, honeysuckle, and mint. And that was also derived from the Yinhua San formula. So they basically combined those 2 formulas in order to make this formula. And that was included in something called the Treatise on Epidemic Febrile Disease, written by Wu Tang, and an outstanding Chinese medicine expert during the Qing dynasty, I believe. So I might be like mispronouncing all these, but these are just things that I'm actually reading from some of these sources and that I picked up from some of these sources. Okay, it says, moreover, according to the famous literary work, a general treatise on plague written by the well-known physician Wu Yujing during the Ming Dynasty, Lianhua also includes rhubarb for the treatment of epidemic febrile plaques. And according to traditional Chinese medicine theory, the clinical symptoms of David are linked to epidemic febrile diseases. Rhodiola, the radix isoditis, which is the indigo woad, Dryopteris crassirhizoma, which is the thick-stemmed wood fern, the Hutiunia cordata, which is the fish mint, and the patchouli basically were added to Lianhua formula based on evidence-based pharmacological and medical studies. So that's how they basically came up with this combination. All right, there's a number of others that I just want to rifle through really quickly because I'm almost out of battery life here. So here's a randomized control trial, the Zhang et al., and that's effectiveness of Lianhua Qingwen capsule in treatment of asymptomatic David patients, a randomized control multicenter trial. And this is where you want to get. When you do in vivo studies, you want to go to a randomized control trial where you have the control group and you have the one that's given the medicine. So you might have a placebo and you give them medicine and you see what comes out of that. And you will ideally want to have many people in the study. You don't want to just have like 2 people because then you only have 2 data points, or 1 data point if one's in the control group and the other one's not. So there could be more studies coming out of this that are like this, but here's just one of the ones that I found, and multiple ones that I found. And there's just a ton of support for the medicine that I mentioned, okay? Like there's double-blind studies out there published in peer-reviewed science journals. This is another one, Sun et al., Efficacy and Safety of Lianhua Qingwen for Patients with David, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. There's Zhuang et al., Complementary Therapies in Medicine. Li et al., Efficacy and Safety of Chinese Medicine, Lianhua Qingwen for Treating Pandemic, and Updated Meta-Analysis. So that's actually taking all the other studies that were out there and looking at this one. And this one is interesting because it showed that Lianhua Qingwen combined with Western medicine was efficacious in the pandemic. So that's one that I would recommend even taking a look at. There's another one called Wang et al., Meta-Analysis on the Effect of Combining Lianhua Qingwen with Western Medicine to Treat David Disease, 2019. And then Liu et al., Efficacy and Safety of Herbal Medicine of Lianhua Qingwen for Treating David, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis from the Integrative Medicine Research. And Runfeng et al., Lianhua Qingwen exerts antiviral and anti-inflammatory activity against novel Davids. That's out of the pharmacological research. All right, and so this is the last research that I'll feature because this video has already gotten so long and I'm talking really fast because I'm almost out of battery life. But this one's a traditional Chinese medicine formula, NR1C M101, or sorry, it might be NRIC M101, to target David through multiple pathways, a bedside to bench study. This was published in Biomedicine and Pharmacotherapy. Now, I'm going to give you the decoction for this and I'll show you the herbs. The decoction of NRICM101 was prepared by the traditional Chinese medicine pharmacies in 2 medical centers after slightly modifying the formula for mild cases. It consisted of 10 herbs. So these 10 herbs include the Scutellaria root, which is that Scutellaria bicalensis. That's the one that I found my mouse eating in the house. The heart leaf Hudayunia, which is the fish mint, the mulberry leaf Morus alba, the Saposkinovacovia root. I don't know how to pronounce that one. It's not one I'm as familiar with. But the Mongolian snake gourd root, which is the Trichosanthes curloi, which I had mentioned before. Indigo woad root, which is Asatis indigotica, mentioned that. Baked licorice root, Glycyrrhiza glabra. Magnolia bark, which is Magnolia officinalis. Peppermint herb, they use a specific kind of mentha called haplocalyx. And then the fine leaf Nepeta, which is Nepeta tenuifolia. But you could probably substitute it out with a different kind of mint or a different kind of catmint. Now, for a patient's daily dose, a full set of herbs and 1 liter of water were placed in a boiler and simmered for the decoction to reduce to 300 milliliters. Now, on this page, you'll see that I have showcased how many grams of herbs were used in this particular patented NRICM101 that was used in China to target the pandemic. That to me right there is an interesting remedy. I mean, why not? I have a lot of these herbs. I mean, and you should too. I mean, what can I say? This is crazy to me. I mean, these research reports that I've pulled are really a small sampling of information that is out there. And there's so much information that it could be so overwhelming, particularly if these types of concepts and alternatives are new to you. I mean, it was overwhelming to me just to kind of go through each one and say, okay, which ones am I going to share with you? But honestly, I found this rather elucidating and quite personally a bit upsetting. I mean, I have found this upsetting for the fact that we don't have equivalent treatments on the market. That these treatments are being made elsewhere in other countries that have alternative systems set up to encourage health and recovery, and that these treatments are being put to the rigor of peer-reviewed testing, in vitro, in vivo testing, double-blind studies. I mean, come on. I mean, how much more information do you need to say like these things could, should be maybe used elsewhere and other than the countries that they're being used? So sorry, I'm getting worked up about this, but you could tell it's a really important thing, and it's stuff that I wish I knew beforehand. So I will let you sit with all this and just drink it all up, think it all up, and you see what you think. I mean, don't take my word for it. You could actually, I'm including a lot of this research that I've shown here. You could take a look at each and every single one. You could go down the rabbit hole as I had gone down the rabbit hole. And I really trust that this has blown your mind as it has mine. And if for some reason the YouTube gods determine that this has violated any constrictive or restrictive policies, that you'll be able to find this resource on our Rumble platform, because we started a Rumble channel as well. And even though that we haven't put out any newsletters yet, you can also sign up for our mailing list on our website at flockfingerlakes.com, just in case you would like to be communicated with down the line, as we might explore more topics like this in the future. I will be covering herbs more definitely on this channel. And I just have to say, I take a deep breath. And thank you all for your kind support. I mean, it really means a lot to us. So if you haven't yet, I will just make this last plea. Give this a like, share it around, hit the subscribe button and that notifications bell. And you know, that notifications bell is the only thing that let you know a new video has been posted and released. So we would really appreciate that because we want to be more in communication with you. When I find mind-blowing things like this, I want you to be the first to know so that you feel more protected, that you feel more empowered with this information. So yeah, what else can I say? Well, you know, just as a reminder, like 10% of our Google AdSense proceeds are actually being reinvested back here in the Finger Lakes community. So I think that's great. You know, if you subscribe and you watch and you support this channel, that really does go a long way. And we believe in giving back to our community in ways that we can. And this is a way that we can, helping keep circulating the money and the value in the community. And that's a way that we could actually do this through our videos. So thank you so much for your support. This is Summer Rain signing off, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye, guys.